Carly's 1974 album, Hot Cakes. People were interested in the men in Carly's life, and one man in particular, her first husband and the father of her children, Sally and Ben. Carly Simon married the singer-songwriter James Taylor in November 1972. Theirs was a relationship that drew the attention of the media, and there was even talk of the couple filming a remake of A Star Is Born. That distinction went to Streisand and Christopherson, but Carly's relationship with James Taylor would change the singer's life forever.
Did you know that James built this house? Well, this is the very room that we first started to live in. We only had this room. But I came up and joined James in this house in 1971, and we married in 72. And he taught me so much, even before we met. He taught me so much just by listening. I was so fascinated. And you know, there are those certain relationships that you know that you're going to merge with, enduring, and whereas somebody else might have the analysis of our relationship that I set out to get him, that was not it at all. I simply knew that I was going to join him, and I knew it by the tone of our voices. I knew it by our harmonies. I knew it by that thing that the air knows that you don't. I knew it.
I've got my mind on my man again. I've got my man on my mind. He's everything to me. He's something more special than any amount of looking's gonna find. I'm not hooked on any hero from an idle dream, but I'm idly dreaming of him. He's a lotus that opens and closes. Notice he won't always let me in. So my mind is on my man. Got my man on my mind.
I would see pictures of him, and I would know that he was going to be the father of my children. And I can't explain how I knew, except that if you see my children, you would know it in a minute that it was meant to be. And James taught me a great deal about music. He was always very much the boss of the music in our family. He pretended not to be, but he was always the boss. And I was demure. I was embarrassed when You're So Vain was such a hit, because he had a song that in my mind was far better than You're So Vain out at the same time, which was Don't Let Me Be Lonely Tonight. And I was humiliated that that song didn't rise to the kind of success that You're So Vain did. And I sat and punished myself the entire time that it was successful. I loved James beyond what anyone will ever understand. And his children, my children, are to me, sacred beings. They are extraordinary children, and so loved and so loving and so capable of bearing that union, which for them has been very hard because the divorce was not easy. The carrying on of the relationship, the years that we've been separate, has been most awkward. And I very often get the feeling that he would like to keep me away from him. And because of that, the feeling gets translated or gets passed down to the children in the way he feels about them. And even though I know he loves them very, very much, he can't help but, as long as he wants to reject me, it's not healthy for anyone involved.
Carly Simon and James Taylor divorced in 1983. The formative years of Carly's professional career saw the arrival of a collaborator who not only changed the way the singer performed, but also how she viewed herself as an artist, record producer Richard Perry.
Richard and I were a combination that was to me thrilling. Richard was very inspiring to me. Richard wanted me to belt, and I didn't love to belt. To me, Paul Samuel Smith was the master of the understatement, and Richard was the master of the overstatement. And the part of me, interestingly enough, that James loved the most was the understatement. And so there was, to me, a tremendous conflict between James and Richard, at least in my mind. Attitude Dancing was not a song that I ever liked. I mean, it's a song that I liked. I didn't like the record. And that was hopefully going to be the favorite. But it was recorded in the wrong key. It was recorded a whole step too high. And so therefore you have me just croaking that song. And if anything, Richard was pushing me into a key that I couldn't record in because it just was uncomfortable, so that what was supposed to seem urgent just came out as discomfort. But Waterfall was the song that we were hoping was going to be the hit from that album.
Playing Possum's cover caused a scandal, as it featured the new mother dressed in a camisole and black leather boots. Some American stores even refused to promote it. There was no ignoring Carly Simon, but she was torn between the direction she wanted to go in and that dictated by her producer, Richard Perry.
My relationship with Richard began to suffer because of the conflict in my own mind with who I was, whether I wanted to belt, whether I wanted to overdub my voice 5 times to make it stronger and stronger and stronger. And he definitely has a point. That sound of my voice belting and hitting those high, at least for me, A's, was a powerful thing at the time. And You're So Vain depends upon that. Nobody Does It Better depends upon that.
Nobody Does It Better from the James Bond film The Spy Who Loved Me gave Carly Simon an international hit and remains one of her most successful singles. Back in the recording studio, and now with a new producer, Ted Templeman, Carly Simon tried a fresh start with the album Another Passenger.
There were some very good songs on that record. There was the association with Michael McDonald, and It Keeps You Running, which was Michael's song. I just tried to imitate him on that song. But that album, I feel, had some good moments, but it was mixed badly. The vocals were not up enough. So I think it got lost in the mix. And Ted Templeman, who was my producer, was a wonderful man. He's actually admitted that. He said, I made a terrible mistake with that record. Just the mix was just all off. It had a lot of possibility, and it didn't realize its potential.
It Keeps You Running from Another Passenger. Carly Simon's next release would see her back on top form, due in part to a self-imposed 2-year break from the recording studio. The album Boys in the Trees saw a return to her unflinching, reflective style as she continued to explore the loves and mores of her age and class. Carly chose Arif Mardin as producer, but Ted Templeman once again was central to the album's biggest hit, another collaboration with the Doobie Brothers' Michael McDonald.
The Doobie Brothers were going to be recording You Belong to Me for their album. And Teddy called me up and said, would you mind writing a lyric to that? Because Michael would love you to do a lyric for that. And so I said, I'd love to. Just ask him to send me a tape of whatever he's got. And he did, and within 15 minutes I'd written the lyric. Michael wrote the line, You Belong to Me. So that was already written. I just filled in the rest of the spaces. And Michael and I never spoke to each other during the writing of that. Only after it was a hit on my record did I receive a plant from him. And then I think later on there was a telephone call, and he had his version out. I think the tempo was better on mine, and mine had the benefit of the group called Stuff on it, which was Richard T. and Cornell Dupree, and it was just an incredible band. And it also had James singing on it. And so it was just a wonderful combination. It had a certain je ne sais quoi.
Although no stranger to collaboration, when she writes on her own, Carly Simon has a preferred way to compose.
I write most of my songs when I'm unhappy or blue or sad or depressed or anxious or any of those less than happy emotions, in order to solve problems, put it into second-person context. In other words, if I'm singing about it, I'm then listening to it, and by witnessing it. If I'm witnessing it, I'm not feeling it firsthand. I'm listening to it. I can then cry about it as though I'm watching a movie and crying about it. And I'm getting a second-hand purgation. I can get rid of it that way. I can cast it off. We're So Close, I think, is the most ironic song that I've ever written. It is the saddest because it implies room for so much togetherness, and yet it points up to the very long, huge, lonely distances between two people who are supposedly in love.
I've lived in all the houses he's built, the one in the air, the one underground, the one on the water, the one in the sand. He says it doesn't matter how we live. He says it doesn't matter where we live. We're so close we can dispense with houses. We don't need a home at all. There's a husky voice that speaks to me in the dark and on the phone from studios and west side bars through tunnels of long distance. He says we're beyond flowers. He says we're beyond compliments. We're so close we can dispense with love. We don't need love at all.
We're So Close, from the 1979 album Spy. As the decade came to a close, Carly Simon was facing a decline in album sales, perhaps due in some part to her continued reticence to go on tour and perform live in concert.
There are some times that for some reason they seem to go swimmingly, and they're not really accompanied by too much trauma. And then the next day, under equally favorable or unfavorable conditions, it could just be terrible. So I never know. Now usually I have the same mask on whether it's A or B. I'm prone to depression, and I like the dark because that helps me so much, because then people can't see me. And if they can't see me, then it's almost as good as them not being able to hear me.
But when she does manage to overcome her fears, Carly Simon's live concerts are a treat for her loyal fans. And one special performance on Martha's Vineyard was captured on the album Greatest Hits Live.
Do I think that there's an analogy between depression and creativity? It's possible that creative people, especially people who are writing from their own heart and their own emotions, are more concentrated on their feelings. It's not until you have self-conscious beings that you get depression. And so therefore, the more self-conscious, the more depressed. I do know that helping other people helps. I do know that that's the singular, most therapeutic thing that you can do, because we're all in this human condition together, and we all have to hold each other up, not with our secrets, but with our truths.
Next week on Clouds in My Coffee, the Carly Simon story.
I've always wanted to be the voice in a movie ever since I was a little girl.
Carly Simon fights cancer and battles with the record industry.
I forced upon him a meeting, and he spent the whole time watching MTV and not even looking at me. He was that disinterested in my material. He couldn't get rid of me fast enough.
She reveals the most important recording of her career.
Oh, and I'm so glad that you're talking about this album, because I really had this feeling that this album was just dead in the water.
And we have a world exclusive from the singer's next album.